From what happened in Lima, poor people, especially those in the developing world, will continue to suffer the impact of climate change. The world's biggest emitters, both the past and present industrialized states, including members of the European Union and the United States, advocated voluntary contributions instead of legally binding commitments, as was the case with the Kyoto Protocol. This is what is being referred to as intended nationally determined contributions, in the process abolishing the developed and developing countries grouping enshrined in the annexing system under the UN Climate Convention.
You need to address the issue of technology. We need to address the issue of capacity building. We need to address the issue of finance. We also need to address the issue of understanding the basis, the convention. They need to understanding what you call technology mechanism. So these are critical issues. They are not textbook stuff. These are critical issues that you and I must be prepared to face. And the other side, which I think is very critical, is that we ourselves must be ready.
While the general consensus is that each country should provide its INDCs by October 2015, Lima could neither provide satisfying guidance on the scope of INDCs nor defined roles for each country. The developed and developing country divide came into play once more. Rich countries pressed for mitigation-only contributions and that all countries be obliged to offer a mitigation contribution. Numerous developing countries disagreed. Those in Africa and the rest of the developing world contended that INDCs should also include adaptation and financial, technology and capacity building support from rich nations who caused the climate problem. Developed countries refused to provide guarantees for specific and predictable financial support and instead called on countries in a position to do so to offer support. Otherwise, poor and vulnerable countries should make do with donor aid. Lima resolved that parties consider including an adaptation component in their INDCs, but were under no obligation to do so. Industrialized states had earlier rejected parity between the two crucial aspects of mitigation and adaptation. This is bad news for Africa, a continent most vulnerable to climate impact, which has been advocating parity between mitigation and adaptation in the New Deal. For many African nations, the road to Paris is rough and long.
When we left Poland and we said we are going to Lima, between Poland and Lima, we have a UN Secretary General Summit on climate change that brought in head of state, private sector, civil society. Nobody could ever have thought that. People are now talking about funding. When we left Poland, there was virtually no fund. By the time in fact, it was a week before the UN Secretary General Summit that the idea of, Norway came up, suddenly I said, I'm going to put this. This one came in and says, the Germans came up, I'm going to do this. However, I'm worried. Why am I worried? You are talking about 100 million. Out of this 100 million, by the time you start to look at what goes into what, administrative cost, consultants, this. They are not people from my area. They are not from developing countries. And that is what I honestly believe that we should tap on.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon last month criticized the negotiations launched almost 4 years ago in South Africa as advancing at a snail pace. The United Nations says national plans for curbing greenhouse gas emissions submitted as the building blocks of the Paris Agreement will not be enough to limit warming to a United Nations goal of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. That means a need for flexibility to ratchet up ambitions in an accord meant to limit greenhouse gases, blamed by the UN's panel of climate scientists for causing more heat waves, floods and rising sea levels. Major emitters led by China and the United States have submitted national plans for cuts in greenhouse gases beyond 2020 to the United Nations as building blocks for the Paris Accord. For Paris to be successful, On Tuesday, the 21st of July, the French president welcomed world leaders to the French capital for a climate conference ahead of the UN summit that will take place later this year.
The meaning of this meeting is to assemble all of the consciences. The word conscience impacts every one of us. It's up to every individual to see what he or she can do to save the planet. There are philosophies, there are convictions, there are global diversities that should at a certain point unite, and unite to make decisions. What takes place today is very important. There will be women and men from every continent who have every conviction and religion possible on the planet and who are coming together to send a single message. An agreement should be made in Paris at the climate conference. It's not an issue for heads of state and governments. This is an issue for all the residents of the world.
The meeting, dubbed the Summit of Conscience for the Climate, gathered 40 global religious, intellectual and moral leaders to discuss the pertinence of making changes to reduce carbon emissions and slow global warming. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan told the conference that strong leadership was key to reaching an agreement this time around.
Let us develop a global conscience based on well-being of our planet that transcends national boundaries or group and self-interest. Every nation and every individual working together must strive to defeat the threat of global warming. We can succeed, but it would require sustained and determined leadership.
Ahead of the UN's climate change conference in Paris in December, countries are required to submit national plans, which will serve as the building blocks of a final agreement. To date, 47 countries, covering 59% of global emissions, have entered climate plans, including China, the United States, and the European Union. That is already an improvement on the current phase of the Kyoto Protocol, which only covers 13% of emissions. The plans, known as intended nationally determined contributions, are meant to be the building blocks for a deal in Paris. The federal government has said that Nigeria will submit its INDC in September. The deadline for countries to submit their INDCs is the 1st of October.
So Nigeria's participation in continental, regional and global negotiations needs to be more enriched with our great human resources, with input from our human resources that are globally recognized. So that when these positions come up, the African position will generally reflect that of Africa, that of Nigeria. Because when you settle the issues of Nigeria, you have settled more than half of the issues in Africa. Because Nigeria has the capacity to carry Africa on its shoulders effectively. So all this fire brigade approach will be a thing of the past. Nigerian delegations should arrive in international meetings, regional meetings, 2 or 3 days before to be able to influence and change things. It is recognized anywhere in the world that when you have 1 or 2 Nigerians, things change. But how come we don't feel that impact in regional meetings? Rather, you see Nigeria tagging along with what Ghana has said. Nigeria tags along with what South Africa says. You don't see a Nigerian position that is coming up in regional meetings. Now we talk of global. Why? Because we are always lagging behind as a result of our inefficient handling of things.
Nigeria has not only the population, we also have the experts. But there is a need for us to put all these things together. And we are looking at the issue of how do you build capacity in this area that in another 5 years, people can have a profession. Because that is where the world is going. You are talking about low carbon economy. That is where the new road of where our economy is going. It's a low carbon economy. What does it mean? What are the ground rules? Do we have what it takes? These are knowledge-based things. They are not theory.
Of surveyed countries, approximately 85% report that they feel challenged by the short time frame available to develop the INDC. Other challenges reported include difficulty to secure high-level political support, a lack of certainty and guidance on what should be included in INDCs, and limited expertise for the assessment of technical options. The intended nationally determined contributions, individually submitted by countries, will largely determine whether the world achieves an ambitious 2015 agreement and is put on a path toward a low-carbon, climate-resilient future. The INDC process should enable poorer countries to make the links between putting together their own development priorities and climate strategies and winning climate finance via the Paris Agreement to help put those into practice. Well, last week, a report based on talks with negotiators indicated strong will in nations to reach a climate agreement in 2015. Well, we'll be keeping eyes on all the talks and bring them to you as they happen. That's our program for today. Let's do it again next week. From all of us here in Lagos, it's bye for now.